You opened the app without deciding to. Your thumb just moved. Your eyes found a face. A stranger. Someone you have never met, will never meet, living a life that has nothing to do with yours. And for the next several minutes, you watched. You watched what they ate for breakfast. You watched where they went on holiday. You watched them argue with a partner, redecorate a kitchen, cry on camera about something you only half understood. You watched their child take a first step. You watched them quit a job you didn't know they had. You watched them walk through a city you have never visited, eating food you have never tasted, laughing at a joke you came in too late to hear. And when you finally put the phone down, you felt something strange, not quite empty, not quite satisfied, something in between. Something you could not name. Here is the thing. You think this is a modern problem. You think it is the apps, the algorithms, the influencers, the endless scroll. You think something has gone wrong with you, or with society, or with the way screens have rewired the human brain. You have probably read articles about it. You have probably felt guilty about it. You have probably told yourself, more than once, that you were going to stop. And then your thumb moved again. But the real answer is far stranger. What you felt in that moment, that pull, that hunger to watch, to track, to know what other people are doing, that is not a glitch. It is not a failure of willpower. It is not a symptom of a generation that grew up too online. It is one of the oldest and most powerful engines in the entire history of your species. You were built for this, and understanding why will change the way you see almost everything. Your brain is social before it is anything else, not rational, not logical, not creative, social. This is the conclusion that Robin Dunbar, an evolutionary psychologist at the University of Oxford, spent decades arriving at. Dunbar's work on primate cognition in the early 1990s produced a finding so counterintuitive it rewrote how scientists understand the human mind. The neocortex, the outer layer of the brain responsible for higher thinking, language, planning, and abstract reasoning, did not evolve primarily to solve problems. It evolved to manage relationships. The size of the neocortex, across dozens of primate species, correlates almost perfectly with the size of the social group those primates naturally live in. More complex social world, bigger brain to navigate it. Humans sit at the extreme end of this curve. Your neocortex is disproportionately large, not because your ancestors needed to figure out how to build fire, they needed to figure out who had betrayed whom at the watering hole. This is the foundation of what became known as Dunbar's number. The idea that the human mind can comfortably track, maintain, and reason about approximately 150 stable social relationships at any given time. Not acquaintances, not followers, relationships, people whose lives you can model in your head, people whose motivations you can anticipate, people you could call on in a crisis or warn about a threat. That number, 150, appears across thousands of years of human social organization. Hunter-gatherer bands, Roman military units, Neolithic villages, medieval English parishes, modern military company sizes, Hutterite communities who intentionally split when a settlement exceeds this ceiling, because beyond it, you can no longer know everyone and the social glue begins to dissolve. Again and again, the number hovers at that ceiling, because that is roughly how many people your brain can actively hold. But here is what matters. Within that group of 150, knowing what other people were doing was not idle curiosity, it was survival. Think about what life looked like for the overwhelming majority of human existence. Not 1,000 years ago, not 10,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. Your ancestor woke up in a group of people. Everything that kept them alive, food, shelter, protection, reproduction, depended entirely on the behavior of the humans around them. Who was forming alliances with whom? Who had a surplus of food and might share it? Who was losing status and becoming a liability? Who was sleeping with whose partner? Who was planning to leave? And where were they planning to go? Who could be trusted in a fight, and who would collapse under pressure? Who had lied last season and might lie again? Who was sick? Who was getting stronger? Tracking all of this, in real time, with imperfect information, across a group of dozens of people, that was the central cognitive task of human life. Not hunting, not gathering. Those things were important. But they were relatively simple compared to the infinitely complex, constantly shifting social landscape your ancestors had to navigate every single day. A hunt had a beginning and an end. The social landscape never ended. The people who were bad at this died, not always dramatically, sometimes quietly. They misjudged an alliance and found themselves without support in a moment of scarcity. They trusted the wrong person and lost access to resources that would have kept them alive through a hard winter. They failed to notice that someone important was pulling away and couldn't repair the relationship before it became a rupture. They misread the mood of the group and made a claim that alienated them at exactly the wrong time. The social landscape was lethal, and reading it required a constant, vigilant, never-resting form of attention. The people who were exceptional at it thrived. Their children survived. Their children's children survived. Generation after generation, the genes that supported social vigilance were selected for. And what does social vigilance require? Curiosity about other people's lives, attention to what they are doing, a drive to know, a restlessness that does not quiet until you have a current, accurate picture of the social landscape around you. Your brain inherited that drive, all of it, amplified over hundreds of thousands of years of selection pressure into something almost compulsive. Something your conscious mind did not ask for and cannot simply switch off. The hunger to know what other people are doing is not a habit, it is hardware. The neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman, in his 2013 book Social, describes a series of experiments that revealed something remarkable about the default mode network, the part of the brain that activates when you are not actively doing anything, when you are daydreaming, when your mind wanders, when you sit in a waiting room with nothing to focus on. For a long time, scientists assumed this network was simply idling, resting between tasks. What Lieberman found instead was that the default mode network is in fact deeply active. It is running social simulations. It is replaying conversations, imagining future interactions, modeling other people's mental states, rehearsing what you might say next time, wondering why someone behaved the way they did last week. Your brain does not rest, it socializes. Even when you think you are doing nothing, the most energy-intensive, evolutionarily ancient part of your cognitive system is practicing the one skill that kept your species alive, understanding other people. Lieberman argued that the enormous metabolic cost of the human brain was paid for not by the intellectual dividends of individual problem-solving, but by the survival advantages of social intelligence at group scale. Your brain is not a general-purpose reasoning machine that happens to be good at socializing. It is a social machine that happens to be capable of reasoning. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable, biological activity. Your brain burns significant glucose running social simulations while you stare at the ceiling. The same brain that feels exhausted after a day of focused cognitive work will happily spend hours rerunning a conversation from 3 days ago, not because it is broken, but because it is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The work of social tracking never felt like work, it felt like thinking. Because for your brain, they are the same thing. Now think about what the smartphone put in your hand. Not entertainment, not distraction, a window into the social lives of other people with real relationships, real conflicts, real triumphs, real failures, real daily routines. An endless, constantly refreshing supply of exactly the kind of social information your brain evolved to consume. The algorithm didn't create the hunger, it identified it. And it engineered a delivery system so perfectly calibrated to that hunger that your thumb began to move before your conscious mind decided anything. Psychologist Sherry Turkle at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology has spent decades studying what technology does to human connection. Her research documents something that at first seems obvious but turns out to be profound. When people describe why they check social media, they rarely say they are bored. They rarely say they are looking for entertainment. They say they want to know what is happening, with people they know, with people they admire, with people they haven't spoken to in years and may never speak to again. They want to know the social landscape. They want to keep their internal map current. This is the ancestral drive wearing a modern mask. The need to know who is rising, who is falling, who is connected to whom, what mood the group is in, whether the social environment has shifted since you last checked. That need is primal. It predates language. It predates agriculture. It predates writing, money, cities, every institution you can name. It is the oldest engine in the human cognitive system, and the smartphone feeds it in a way nothing in the history of the species has ever matched. You are not addicted to your phone. You are using your phone to do what your brain was always doing. You have simply found a more efficient delivery mechanism for a need that is hundreds of thousands of years old. The efficiency is the problem, not the need. Because the social information your ancestor was tracking had one critical feature. It was bounded. The group had a ceiling, 150 people, maybe 200 on a good day. The social landscape was complex but finite. Your brain could hold it, update it, work with it. The anxiety it generated was calibrated to a human-scale problem with human-scale resolution. You tracked the alliances. The alliances settled. You tracked the tensions. The tensions resolved one way or another. The loop closed. What happens when you remove the ceiling? In 2022, the psychologist Amy Orban at the University of Cambridge published research examining what she calls the social media dose-response relationship. The question she was asking was subtle. Not whether social media use correlates with poor well-being, that had already been established across dozens of studies, but whether the relationship worked like a drug, whether more use produced more harm, whether specific types of use were more harmful than others. And what her data consistently revealed was a signal around passive social consumption. Scrolling without engaging, watching without responding, consuming the lives of others without any reciprocal exchange. This matters because it reveals something about the architecture of the hunger. Watching other people's lives, at social media scale, generates all the neural activation of real social engagement, the curiosity, the comparison, the emotional resonance, without any of the resolution. In an ancestral context, watching someone in your group eat a meal would eventually be followed by your own meal, or a conversation, or a shared experience. The social information would integrate into your world, the loop would close. But watching a stranger's dinner across a phone screen closes nothing. The brain registers the social input. It waits for the reciprocal exchange that the ancestral context would have provided. The reciprocal exchange never comes. And so the hunger remains, and you scroll for more, and the hunger remains again. Now here is where it gets stranger. The people whose lives you watch are mostly strangers. You know this. You have never met them. You do not share a community, a history, or a mutual network. And yet something in you cares. You feel something when they succeed. You feel something real when they struggle. You follow the arc of their lives the way you would follow the arc of someone you actually know. You notice when they go quiet. You feel a flicker of something like loss when they disappear from a platform. Why? The answer takes you back another 50,000 years, into a cognitive system that psychologists call theory of mind, the ability to model the inner mental life of another person, to infer their beliefs, desires, intentions, and emotions from observable behavior, to simulate with surprising accuracy what it feels like to be them. This is not a skill humans learn the way they learn to read or do arithmetic. It is a capacity humans develop naturally, built into the cognitive architecture from birth. Developmental psychologist Simon Baron-Cohen at Cambridge has spent his career mapping the neural basis of theory of mind. His research shows that by the age of 4, most human children can spontaneously infer what another person believes to be true, even when that belief is demonstrably false. They can run a simulation of a mind that is not their own. They can stand inside someone else's perspective without losing track of their own. And they do it automatically, without instruction, the way they learn to walk. Baron-Cohen calls this the empathizing system, and it does not ask for your permission. You cannot see a human face without your brain beginning to model the interior experience behind it. You cannot hear a human voice describing a difficulty without something in you beginning to feel a version of that difficulty. The system runs continuously, on every human signal you encounter. And critically, it does not require actual social relationship to activate. It requires only the appearance of one. Neuroscientist Yuri Hassan at Princeton has studied what happens in the brain when people engage with narrative, stories, documentaries, confessional vlogs, first-person accounts. His neural coupling experiments show that the brain of a viewer begins to synchronize with the brain of the person on screen, not metaphorically, measurably. Activity in the prefrontal cortex, the regions responsible for understanding intention and social context, aligns between the watcher and the watched. Your brain, running its empathizing system on a stranger through a screen, is partially simulating being that stranger, running a version of their experience inside your own neural architecture. This is why you feel anxious when someone you follow reveals they are going through something serious. This is why you feel a genuine flicker of pleasure when a stranger announces a success. This is why you grieve, sometimes with real weight, when a public figure you have never met dies. Your brain did not evolve to distinguish between the simulation of social relationship and the real thing. For the vast majority of human history, there was no difference worth distinguishing. The people you could see and hear were the people in your group. Their faces, their voices, their lives were real social information by definition. The screen changed the equation entirely. Your brain, working with ancient machinery in a radically new environment, applies its most sophisticated tools to faces that exist only as compressed video data. It cannot help it. That is what the machinery does. Psychologist Jay Derrick at the University at Buffalo named one important dimension of this, the social surrogacy hypothesis. The idea that parasocial relationships, one-sided connections with media figures, content creators, personalities, can function as genuine substitutes for social belonging when real-world connection is unavailable or insufficient. Her research found that people who felt lonely or excluded would turn to familiar media figures and report a genuine restoration of belonging afterward. Their need to feel socially embedded was real. The relationship that partially satisfied it was not. But the brain reported a meaningful reduction in isolation regardless. This could be read as a warning about the superficiality of digital connection, but the picture is more complicated than that. Because the drive that has you following a stranger's life across a screen is the same drive that built every human civilization ever constructed. The curiosity about how other people live, what they value, what choices they make, how they survive their difficulties, this is not noise. It is signal. It is how culture transmits across time. It is how moral frameworks evolve across generations. It is how individuals, in every era of human history, have understood what is possible for someone like them. Consider what ethnographers call observational social learning. The anthropologist Joseph Henrich at Harvard has spent years studying the mechanisms by which human knowledge, not just information, but genuine adaptive knowledge, spreads across populations. His research demonstrates that humans are, among all living things, uniquely efficient at learning by watching others, not just copying surface behavior, extracting the underlying logic of behavior, inferring what worked, what didn't, and why, from watching someone else try. This capacity, which Henrich calls cumulative cultural evolution, is the primary mechanism by which the human species became what it is. It is more powerful than individual intelligence, more powerful than formal instruction. The ability to watch a skilled person do something and absorb the principle behind it is the foundation of everything your species has ever built. In an ancestral community, watching how the most respected elder resolved conflict, or how the most successful forager read landscape and season, or how a skilled hunter moved with patience rather than speed, this was education. Deep, high-fidelity, experiential education. The same neural architecture that has you watching a stranger navigate a career transition, or rebuild a relationship after betrayal, or make a difficult decision under pressure. That architecture was watching someone in your ancestral group demonstrate how to survive a world that was trying to kill them. The hunger to know how other people are living their lives is also a hunger to learn how life itself can be lived. This is why tutorials go viral beyond their apparent utility. This is why transformation narratives, the arc from before to after, from failure to reconstruction, generate such outsized emotional engagement. Your brain is not merely entertained by these stories. It is extracting information it evolved to seek. It is updating its working model of what is survivable. What kinds of paths are available to a person in the circumstances it recognizes as resembling yours. And it rewards you for this with the same neurological signal that once rewarded successful tracking of social information on the savannah. But here is the first real counterintuitive twist. The social information your brain is most drawn to is not the extraordinary. It is the ordinary. This seems wrong. The content that dominates algorithmic feeds is often aspirational: wealth, beauty, exceptional talent, exotic location, elite performance. The feeds are full of the extreme ends of human experience. And yet strip away the platform optimization and look at what actually produces the deepest parasocial connection, the most felt sense of knowing someone, the most durable engagement. And it is consistently the mundane, the morning routine, the grocery haul, the unscripted moment of doubt at the end of a long day, the difficult conversation with a parent, the small, unremarkable details of an ordinary life lived without editing. Psychologist Bella DePaulo at the University of California, Santa Barbara has studied authenticity and social perception across decades of research. Her findings consistently show that humans are exquisitely sensitive to the difference between performed self-presentation and genuine disclosure. Even at a glance, even through a screen, even in low-resolution video, the brain is running constant authenticity detection because in an ancestral group, the difference between someone performing loyalty and someone actually being loyal was the difference between a real ally and a dangerous liability. The ability to detect social performance, to sense when someone is presenting rather than revealing, is ancient and precise. When someone online reveals something unpolished, a messy background, a moment of genuine fatigue, an admission of failure, a pause where the composure slips, your brain's social circuitry responds disproportionately. Not because suffering is entertaining, because authenticity is precisely what the social tracking system evolved to identify. In a world of performance, genuine ordinary detail is rare signal, and rare signal means, pay attention. This is real information. This is why the most deeply parasocially bonded audiences are not always the audiences of the most polished content. They are the audiences of the apparently unfiltered, the creator who films through the bad week, who admits to the thing they were ashamed of, who lets you see the space behind the camera. Your ancient brain reads those signals the way it read the unguarded body language of a trusted group member. This person is not performing. This is real social data, and real social data has always been the most valuable currency in human life. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar's research goes beyond the famous number. In later work examining what actually maintains social bonds across human groups, he and his colleagues found that approximately 65% of all human conversation, across cultures and contexts, consists of social information exchange. Talk about who is doing what, who is with whom, what has changed, and what might change, what someone said, and what it probably meant. This is what we call gossip in the modern sense, but Dunbar uses the word functionally. Social information exchange is not a side effect of human communication. It is the primary content of human communication. It is how group norms get established and enforced without written law, how reputations accumulate and erode, how collective trust gets calibrated across a population that cannot monitor every member directly. Gossip is the operating system of human society, and it requires that everyone be paying attention to everyone else, all the time, because the currency of social participation is social knowledge, and you can only participate if you know what is happening. Your social media feed is not a distraction from real life. It is the largest, most efficient, most historically unprecedented gossip network ever constructed. It extends the oldest human communication behavior across a global scale, and your brain participates in it with the same ancient, tireless machinery that evolved to track 150 people in a valley somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. The question is what that scale does to the machinery. Because here is what changes when you extend a bounded social tracking system into infinite territory. The anxiety the system was designed to generate, the restlessness that says you do not yet have a full picture of the social landscape, never resolves. In a group of 150, you could in principle catch up. You could check in with enough people, hear enough news, update enough of your internal models to reach something like social saturation, a temporary sense of knowing where things stood. That sense was never permanent, but it was achievable. It was the cognitive reward for doing the social work. When the group is infinite, you never reach saturation. There is always another person you haven't checked in on, another life whose current chapter you don't know, another update you missed while you were sleeping, or working, or looking at a different screen. The map is always incomplete. The system that evolved to feel relief when the map was current will never feel that relief, because the territory it is now mapping is not a valley. It is the entire social output of 8 billion people, updated in real time. This is the precise mechanism behind the scrolling feeling. Not pleasure, not satisfaction, the particular, hollow compulsion of a hunger that cannot be fed by the thing that is feeding it. You are not weak. You are not undisciplined. You are running social tracking software on a dataset it was never designed to handle. Neuroscientist Mary Helen Immordino-Yang, at the University of Southern California, has studied the neural correlates of admiration and compassion, the feelings generated when you observe another person's extraordinary achievement or genuine suffering. Her research reveals that these moral emotions require specific processing time. The brain needs to slow down to generate a full emotional response to another person's experience. Fast consumption of emotional content, the 3-second clip, the image scrolled past in less time than a breath, generates a stimulation that mimics the emotion without completing it. The response begins, the neural machinery initializes. But before the circuit closes, the next piece of content arrives, and the process starts over. And over, and over. What accumulates is not experience, it is the ghost of experience, the outline of a feeling that never reached its center. Immordino-Yang's work suggests that the emotional numbness many people describe after long periods of passive social media consumption is not the result of becoming desensitized, it is the result of speed. The brain cannot generate a full emotional response to another person's life in the time the scroll allows. It keeps starting responses it never finishes. And the incompleteness compounds into a kind of emotional static, an inability to feel anything fully, because nothing has been given enough time to resolve into actual feeling. This might be the most important reframe in this entire story. You are not watching too many people's lives. You might be watching them too fast. The brain that evolved to track the lives of 150 people did so continuously, over years, in physical proximity, with the kind of slow-building context that makes genuine understanding possible. You knew why someone acted the way they did because you had watched them act for years. You understood their motivations because you had observed the pattern of their choices across seasons and crises and recoveries. A stranger's life viewed through a 2-minute highlight reel is the social equivalent of trying to understand a novel by reading random sentences. You register words, but you do not absorb meaning. The structure that gives individual moments their significance is missing. The people who feel most genuinely enriched by parasocial connection are almost always the people who have slowed inside it, who have followed someone long enough to understand their context, who have read the long post rather than paused on the image, who have allowed the narrative to build rather than sampling the climax without the setup, who have let social information do what social information evolved to do, integrate slowly into a coherent model of another human being, complete enough to feel real. Your ancestors knew someone for years before they truly knew them. That slowness was not inefficiency, it was the structure of genuine social understanding. Psychologist Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan has spent years studying what he calls chatter, the inner voice that runs social simulations on a loop when they are not consciously directed. The replayed conversation, the imagined confrontation, the rehearsed response, the endless modeling of what other people might be thinking of you right now. His research shows that this chatter, when it runs without direction, amplifies negative emotion, compounds anxiety, and pulls attention away from present experience in ways that erode both performance and well-being. But Kross also finds something crucial. The same cognitive capacity, when directed deliberately, rather than triggered reactively, is among the most powerful tools for decision-making, empathy, and emotional regulation that humans possess. The question, Kross argues, is not whether you think about other people's lives. You always will. The neocortex evolved to think about other people's lives. That machinery is not going quiet because you decided to be more present. The question is whether you are letting the machinery run by default, following wherever the algorithm leads, or whether you are consciously directing it towards something it can actually complete. And here is what that means in practice. The hunger to watch other people's lives is not ultimately a hunger for content. It is a hunger for orientation, for understanding, for the feeling that comes when you have built a real model of another human being and found within it something that illuminates your own life. That feeling is available. Your brain is designed to generate it. The question is whether the way you are consuming social information is capable of producing it. Depth produces it. Speed does not. Continuity produces it. Sampling does not. Reciprocity produces it. The sense that you are a known presence in someone's world as well as an observer of it. And passive consumption never produces reciprocity, because reciprocity requires exchange, and exchange requires that you stop watching long enough to be seen. Think about the people whose lives have genuinely shaped yours. Not the ones you scrolled past, the ones you stayed with long enough to understand, the ones where the accumulated detail of their daily experience began to feel like actual knowledge of a person, where you knew not just what they did but why, where their pattern of choices across time revealed something about human possibility that you could not have found in a single clip. Those encounters are not accidental. They are what the social brain is actually built for, not the breadth, the depth, not the scale, the fidelity. And here is the final truth that everything in this story has been building toward. The deepest function of your obsessive interest in other people's lives is not comparison, it is not entertainment, it is not even social maintenance in the traditional sense. It is the construction of a theory of the possible. Your brain, across your entire lifespan, is building a working model of what human life can look like, what paths exist, what kinds of people survive what kinds of difficulties, what ordinary days feel like when lived with intention versus when they are not, what is recoverable from and what is not, what kinds of relationships are available to a human being who makes the choices available to you. This is not trivial information. It is the operating framework within which you navigate every significant decision of your life. And you build this framework primarily by watching real people live. Every human life you observe in real depth, not sampled, not scrolled, but genuinely observed over time, adds a data point to this model that nothing else can add. You learn something about what is survivable, about what is recoverable, about what kinds of work people find meaningful in the long run versus what flatters and then hollows, about what relationships look like when they are genuinely working and what they look like when they are slowly failing. This knowledge lives in the body, not the notes app. You absorb it the way your ancestors absorbed it, through the long, continuous, often unremarkable observation of real human lives unfolding in real time. This is why certain voices reach you in a way that feels disproportionate to any relationship you technically have with their owner. It is not irrationality. It is your social brain flagging a data point that updates something important about what you believe is possible for someone like you. When you watch someone survive something you are afraid of, something shifts in your internal model, the possible expands. The map changes, not because you know them, because the information is real, and your brain knows the difference between real and performed, even when it cannot explain how it knows. The hunger to watch other people's lives is a hunger to understand what life is. The drive that moves your thumb across the screen is the same drive that gathered your ancestor into a circle around a fire to hear the stories of what happened while the hunters were gone. It has always been how your species transmits not just information but meaning. Not just what happened, but what it was like to be human while it was happening. Tonight, you will open the app. The faces will come. The ancient social machinery will activate. And somewhere in the background of all that stimulation, the same question it has always been asking will be there, quiet and unchanged. What does it mean to live? What are the shapes a life can take? What is available to someone like me, in a world like this, with the time that remains? The irony is that the real thing was never far away. It was always in the room, always in the person sitting across from you, living their ordinary, unremarkable, fully human life, the life you never quite got around to watching as carefully as you watched a stranger's. You opened the app without deciding to. You did it because 100,000 years of selection pressure shaped a brain that cannot stop looking at the lives of other people, a brain that needs to know, a brain that was built, above all else, to understand. The drive was never the problem. You just forgot which direction to point it.